Have you ever sat in a room full of people, laughing at the same joke, nodding along with the same conversation, and still felt like you were the only person who actually understood what was really being said? If that feeling hits somewhere deep in your chest right now, stay with me for the next 8 minutes, because what I'm about to explain might be the missing piece you've been looking for your entire life. The real, research-backed reason why the sharpest minds often end up as the loneliest hearts. There is a strange and rarely talked about truth hiding underneath the surface of modern life. The people who think the deepest, who ask the hardest questions, who notice the patterns nobody else sees, they are often the ones lying awake at 3 in the morning wondering why connection feels so impossible. This isn't bad luck. It isn't a personality flaw. It's a documented psychological pattern, and once you understand it, you'll stop blaming yourself for something that was never really your fault in the first place. Let's start with something psychologist Daniel Goleman spent decades studying. He found that raw intelligence and emotional understanding don't always grow at the same pace inside a person. Someone can process information at lightning speed, spot inconsistencies in an argument before anyone else finishes their sentence, and still feel completely lost when it comes to small talk, casual bonding, or the unspoken social rituals that hold most friendships together. That gap between how fast your mind moves and how slow the world around you seems to move creates a very specific kind of ache, one that looks like isolation from the outside but feels like exhaustion on the inside. Think about the last time you tried to explain something you were genuinely excited about, only to watch the other person's eyes glaze over halfway through your sentence. That moment stings more than people admit. It isn't just disappointment, it's a quiet signal your brain picks up that says, maybe I need to shrink myself to be understood here. Over time, if you keep receiving that signal, you start doing it automatically. You simplify your thoughts before anyone even asks you to. You laugh a little less, honestly. You stop bringing up the ideas that actually light you up, because some earlier version of you learned that sharing them costs more than it gives back. Here's where things get even more interesting, because this pattern actually has roots that go back much further than adulthood. Attachment theory, first developed by Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, teaches us that our earliest relationships shape how safe we feel, showing our full selves to other people. If you grew up as the curious kid who asked too many questions, who noticed the tension in the room before anyone said a word, who saw the cracks in situations adults thought they were hiding well, you likely learned early that being perceptive wasn't always welcomed. Maybe you were told you were too much, or too serious, or overthinking it again. That message doesn't just fade away. It becomes a quiet rule you carry into every relationship afterward. This is the part where I want you to feel something shift, because what looks like a curse is actually evidence of a nervous system working exactly the way it's supposed to. Highly sensitive and highly intelligent people, as researcher Elaine Aron has shown through her work on sensory processing sensitivity, absorb far more information from their environment than the average person. You're not imagining that you notice more. You genuinely do. Every subtle shift in someone's tone, every unspoken tension in a room, every contradiction between what someone says and how they actually behave, your brain catches all of it in real time. That's not exhausting because something is wrong with you. It's exhausting because you're carrying a heavier processing load than most people even realize exists. Now here's the reframe I want you to really sit with, the one that changes everything. Loneliness in this context isn't rejection. It's mismatch. There is a profound difference between being alone because nobody wants you around, and being alone because very few people are currently capable of meeting you at the depth you naturally operate on. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this conversation, because one version tells a story about your worth, and the other simply tells a story about probability. Deep thinkers are statistically rarer, which means deep connection takes longer to find, not because you're unworthy of it, but because you're searching for something that genuinely doesn't come around every day. There's also a biological layer underneath all of this that most people never hear about. When your brain is constantly analyzing, predicting, and evaluating, your nervous system spends a significant amount of energy just trying to keep up with itself. This is closely tied to what trauma researchers call a heightened stress response, where your body treats emotional and social information the way it would treat a genuine threat. Polyvagal theory, developed by Porges, explains how our nervous system is always quietly scanning our environment for safety or danger, even in ordinary social situations. If you've spent years being misunderstood, Your body may have learned to treat vulnerability itself as risky, which makes truly relaxing around other people feel almost impossible, even when you desperately want closeness. I want you to notice something about the timeline of your own life for a second. As a kid, connection may have felt easier because children don't filter each other the way adults do. But somewhere around adolescence, when social hierarchies started rewarding fitting in over standing out, a lot of deep thinkers began quietly retreating. Not because they wanted to be alone, but because performing simplicity felt safer than being fully seen and misunderstood again. That retreat can follow you for decades if nobody ever helps you name what's actually happening. This is usually the point where self-doubt creeps in, where you start asking whether something is fundamentally wrong with you. So let's be honest about that fear right now, because pretending it isn't there wouldn't be fair to you. The truth is, nothing is wrong with you. What's happening is that you are operating on a frequency that requires a specific kind of match, and most environments simply aren't built for that frequency. Viktor Frankl wrote extensively about how meaning, not comfort, is what actually sustains a person through difficult emotional periods. Applied here, that means your loneliness isn't proof you're unlovable. It's proof you haven't yet found the people equipped to receive the depth you're offering. Let's talk about what actually happens in your body when real connection finally does show up, because understanding this can restore hope faster than almost anything else. When you meet someone who can keep pace with your thinking, who doesn't flinch at your intensity, who actually leans in when you go deeper instead of pulling away, your nervous system registers that as safety. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability shows that genuine connection only happens when both people are willing to be fully seen, imperfections and complexity included. That kind of connection doesn't happen often for deep thinkers, but when it does, it tends to run far deeper and last far longer than the surface level bonds most people settle for. Here's something worth remembering the next time loneliness creeps in during a quiet evening. Isolation and solitude are not the same experience, even though they can feel identical from the outside. Isolation is loneliness you didn't choose. Solitude is space you've claimed on purpose, space where your mind gets to think freely without needing to translate itself for anyone else. Many of history's most brilliant thinkers weren't just tolerating solitude, they were using it, treating it as fertile ground for ideas, insight, and self-understanding that never would have surfaced in a noisy room. If you can learn to see your alone time this way, even occasionally, it stops being a wound and starts becoming a resource. I also want to gently name something you may already suspect but haven't said out loud. Some of your loneliest moments haven't come from being physically alone. They've come from sitting in a crowded room and still feeling unseen. That specific kind of loneliness is often more painful than solitude itself because it carries the sting of proximity without the relief of actual understanding. Recognizing this pattern is the first step towards stopping the search for connection in places that were never designed to offer it, and instead redirecting your energy towards spaces where depth is actually welcomed. As you move forward from here, I want you to hold on to one grounding truth. You do not need to become smaller, quieter, or easier to be around in order to finally feel less alone. What you need is patience and the willingness to keep showing up as your full self until you cross paths with people who are built to meet you there. Depth takes longer to find its match, but when it does, it holds. That's not a flaw in your story. That's simply the nature of rare things. So if you've spent years wondering why connection feels harder for you than it seems to for everyone else, let this be the moment you stop treating that as a personal failure and start treating it as information about who you actually are. Your mind was never the problem. It was simply waiting for the right room to finally speak freely in. And if this video helped even one part of that ache make sense, the next one waiting for you is going to dig even deeper into why the people who feel the most also tend to hide it the best. So stay close, because that conversation might explain even more about you than this one just did.